This is the Heroic Voice, where I talk to comic book creators, people I've worked with, other interesting people about the history of comics, superheroes, and the current state of the comic book industry. I also discuss current and upcoming projects, current events, and any other topics my guests might be interested in talking about. So subscribe and hit the like button. Help me grow this channel and promote indie comic book creators, publishers, and other people affiliated with the comic book industry. Your comments are appreciated. Get to it and leave feedback, good, bad, and otherwise. I am your host, Dennis Maloney, writer, publisher of the Heroic Multiverse, where we spotlight good girls, bad girls, super babes, and superheroics in a classic, kind of golden agey style. Grab some snacks and enjoy. This is the Heroic Voice. Welcome to the Heroic Voice. I'm here with Dwight Zimmerman. We had a chance to talk to him a couple of weeks ago about David Anthony Kraft on that panel. And I thought it would be a good idea since Dwight has, such a history in comic books, worked with Marvel, worked with Carol Kalish, wrote a story or two, and worked in licensing, as I understand it, for a while as well. I'm sure Dwight has a lot of stories to share about Marvel. So let's get going with that. Why don't we start by asking you, Dwight, how you actually got into the door at Marvel Comics?
Yeah. Okay. Well, uh, that started when the origins there were high school. Dave and I were high school friends, in Devil's Lake, North Dakota, a small town of 7,000 people, and we were big comic book and science fiction fans. Now, in the late 1960s, early 1970s, fandom of that time was a hell of a lot different than it is now. And what we would do, what hardcore fans would do, was we would create fan magazines called fanzines. Right? And Dennis, I'm sure you're familiar with that.
I'm very familiar with such things.
Yeah. So we created not one, but two fanzines on top of that. One was a science fiction fantasy fanzine called Omnifan, and the other was a biographical fanzine devoted to the pulp fiction writer Otis and Elbert Klein, who was a contemporary of Tarzan creator Edgar Rice Burroughs. And at one point was even his, biggest competitor. Uh, though that didn't last long. Anyway, um, then editor-in-chief Roy Thomas was one of our subscribers to Oak Leaves, Otis Delbert Klein, Oak Leaves. Yeah, so um, and that wound up being the foot in the door, as it were. I'm going to compress a lot of twists and turns and various things. But Dave stayed in touch with Roy over the years after graduation, and then he knocked around in his salad days. And at one point, he wrote to Roy. This is pre-internet, by the way. So everything was done either by phone or through the mail. And he wrote to Roy and said, I want to write for you, at Marvel. And Roy said, well, we don't have a writing opening, but we do have an opening for an assistant editor. So that's how Dave got in. He said yes. Now, then Dave and I stayed in touch. I was working at the University of North Dakota, in their printing department. I had gotten a degree, in printing, so I had print production experience. And during my vacation time, I would go visit Dave, in New York City. I know this is a long story. I'm really trying to compress it, but the upshot being that. Um, At one point, I decided to make the leap of leaving North Dakota and going to work at Marvel, even though I didn't have, you know, a job offer or anything like that. I prevailed on Dave to help me out, and, and to his credit, yeah, even though he was reluctant at first, which I didn't blame him, um, he helped me break into Marvel, and I wound up, it's that classic case of you get in the door. And in my case, it was working in production. And that's how I started out at Marvel. And there's this one, particular anecdote that sticks in my mind. Uh, Steve Gerber, the creator of Howard the Duck,
Yes.
he had moved to Hollywood or Los Angeles and was working in Marvel's animation company at the time. And also at that time, Howard the Duck was a syndicated newspaper strip. Typically of Steve Gerber, he was always late with his scripts. So one day when I went in with Dave and Jim Salicrup into the office, I was told to uh, the situation with Steve. He was late with the script for a Sunday page, and that I was asked to be on the phone with Steve and basically transcribe his script and do the word balloon placement. Yeah, I, for that story. And yeah, yeah. So I'm going through all of the steps. I called up Steve, and he didn't know who I was because we had met previously at one point. Um, and and so he walked me through, panel one, this, that, and the other thing, panel two, blah, 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 blah. And it's one of those quaint anecdotes of the pre-internet days of which you had to, improvise. Um, and then I,
Just
well,
as an aside, improvisation is not dead, for heaven's sake. Uh, I had an issue with a story that's coming up in an issue of Champions where it wasn't staged correctly. Um, the arrival of a hero on the scene to change the course of battle doesn't work if the heroes are already winning. So I had to have the artist insert a page between, where he had ended and where the hero is supposed to show up that actually shows the heroes who are there losing. So,
ah,
you know,
oh yeah.
so that the arrival is actually meaningful when the other hero shows up. So improvisation continues to this day. Please, by all means, continue with your story.
Okay, so then um, me coming to New York turned out to be actually a good time for Dave because he was going through a what I call a trough period. Um, he was having problems, a writing slowdown. It wasn't a writer's block, it was a slowdown. And it was really frustrating for him. Excuse me. And given the fact that New York City is a very expensive town, if you're getting your work output slow, you're not making as much money as you need to, and one thing leads to another. So, since I wanted to break in as a writer, um, which Dave knew, I said, well, hey, how about I do a first draft,
Hmm.
of a script, and then you take a look at it, and we'll see if the collaboration works, yes or no. If it doesn't, okay, fine, but if it does, then we just move on. And that started with the Defenders number 56. Um, Dave had, the plot was done. We had the pencil art from Carmine Infantino. So Dave gave
Please
me,
take a moment. Tell us where the story was when you came in, because that was the days, still is the days, of multi-part epics.
um, okay, I'm
You
sorry.
don't
Could you,
remember?
well, yeah, it was, I remember it being a story, well, basically a mad scientist type of tale. Um, Hey, it's a long time ago because we're talking about 1978. Uh, but the upshot was that, I read the plot, looked at the art, and then I started, writing, the dialogue and captions and everything. And I was, you know, did the best that I could. I mean, I really poured myself into it. And I picked out, excuse me. So then when I finished, which took probably about a week, um, handed everything over to Dave, and he looked at it and he tore it to shreds. He goes, "No, no, no, it's not this, it's not that." Well, what the hell were you thinking of? I mean, it's blue pencil, he's just slashing every page, and not a single word of what I wrote survived.
Oh,
But, but it was a success. Why? Because instead, okay, uh, in the subsequent years, when I've been talking to, in meetings and events and everything like that, I talk to, the audience and I say, there's this thing called the tyranny of the blank page. You're looking at it, whether it's the screen or a sheet of paper, and you're going, what do I put down? What do I write? And that can be, even for experienced writers, as in this case Dave was, and I've had that, occasionally too. Um, you're stuck. But in my massively imperfect script, Dave suddenly had something that he could work off and say, no, this is wrong. It should be this. No, that's wrong. It should be that. Bang, 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 bang. And he was able to finish the script. Now, of course, my ego was pretty well savaged, by that. But and what happened, subsequently is I'd look at what he had written and what I'd done, and then I would ask him why, this, that, and the other thing, basically a tutorial. And the upshot was that we started a wonderful collaboration where I would do the first draft and then he would take it and run with it. And the whole idea was I was an apprentice and I was learning the craft of writing.
the craft of craft.
Ha 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 ha. And so eventually, I'd start seeing a sentence of mine that survived the cut.
Aha.
Then a whole panel of dialogue and captions that did, and then a page, and then so it was incremental victories for me, culminating with 12 months later, Tarzan number 19, in which I did the complete script, and all he did was a few minor, edits.
Well, congratulations.
Yeah, boy, that was a big relief and victory. Um, and you know, at that point, well, Dave had always wanted. Well, he had a history of being a book publisher, and he had this opportunity of returning to Rabun County, Georgia, where he had worked as an editor for this publishing printing plant. Uh, and the owner wanted to sell, so Dave, went down. Contracts were signed, and because Dave knew of my printing background, he asked me to come down with him to help on all that. Literally, the day before we were to walk in and take over, the owner said, "I changed my mind." And he said, whoa, 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 whoa. You can't do that. A contract was signed. He said, I don't care. Now here's a couple $1,000. Go away. Well, lawsuit was initiated, but in the meantime, we had to get work, get income. So Dave went. We talked. That's when, and on top of that, so Dave didn't have a job. And he decided to buy a house on top of Screamer Mountain, this beautiful alpine lodge. Well, he had obviously enough money in the bank that the uh, mortgage lender, agreed to let him, you know, gave him financing. So Dave, we agreed. Dave would go back to New York, reestablish his contacts at Marvel and his relationship, and try and get things going there. I would stay in Rabun County and I'd get a day job. I wound up slinging pizzas at Pizza Hut and then was captain of the dining room at a private resort. Basically, I'd get whatever job I could get. Uh, and I would also do some writing after hours. Um, and it was during one of those times that, well, Dave and I had owned motorcycles, British bikes, Norton. And one day, well, basically what happened is Dave got into a near fatal motorcycle accident. And um, I wound up in the ambulance with him, traveling what amounted to, we did it in two stages. There was a stop, halfway down, at a hospital in Gainesville, and then because of the serious nature of his head injury, the doctors decided to go all the way down to Atlanta. So I'm there, the whole trip, um, going down there, and he goes into the operating room in Atlanta, and I have to call his dad back in North Dakota and tell him, by the way, your son was in a serious, accident. That was no fun. Uh, yeah. The good news was Dave, recovered. Um, we returned to Rabun County. Now, but it's a head injury. So Dave is recovering, but he really can't concentrate on, you know, to the level that you need to when you're writing. He's on the phone with his She-Hulk editor, Alan Milgram. Uh, Now, when Dave became the official writer for the Savage She-Hulk, starting with issue number 2, I was the ghost collaborator with him on that. And Alan was saying, "Well, we'll get someone else to fill in for you." And Dave was saying, "No, no, no, I can write, I can do this. I don't worry, I can still do it." Well, in point of fact, he couldn't. I did, the writing. So there were three issues there. There were three issues of the She-Hulk and this uh, trilogy for Captain America. See if I jotted down a note there. Stu.
Do you remember which issues of Savage She-Hulk those were?
I can't tell you that, but it was. with the Captain America, it was issues started with issue 273. Um, so that would have been, 1978, around in there. Um, anyway, then Dave recovered, and things went all well there.
1980.
Well, okay.
Okay.
I Hey, I'm remembering back how many years now. But anyway, um, but
Sorry, steel trap memory for dates and issue numbers.
well, hell, I'm 71 years old, so sometimes memory fails.
It does. Yeah.
Yeah, and then, but what happened was uh, Ronald Reagan, becomes president. He, embarks on his new economic program. The upshot was that I lost my day job.
Uh,
And so Dave was up in New York, and I just said, Dave, I got to get back to New York because it's just not working for me. Uh, and I managed to land some work as a production assistant for a TV commercial production company based in New York. That's a long story. But the upshot was that thanks to them, I was able to get back to New York. And, you know, with them, I had my day job and renewed my contacts with Marvel, basically with Jim Salicrup, who signed me on freelance basis to work on Marvel Age. Uh, and
Marvel
Marvel
Age was their fan magazine at the time, basically.
Yeah, that was the in-house fan magazine, and I did coming attractions and various feature articles. Now, the one article that I have to say was really a challenge, and I was very nervous about that. Okay, Marvel Vice President Saul Brodsky, whom I knew, really liked. I mean, he was a wonderful man.
Saul
Uh,
was. Everyone
uh,
loved Saul. Yeah.
Yeah. He was responsible for what was then called Special Projects Department. I don't know what they're called now, but essentially what it was is when outside companies contacted Marvel and say, we want to use your characters to help sell our products, like the Hostess cupcakes,
Hmm.
various other things, so those ads that you saw in the comics. Um, they would Saul was responsible for putting together the creative teams, and producing that whole thing. The fun part there was that uh, the writers at Marvel regarded that as beneath them. They didn't have any status. They wanted to write comic book stories. Fair enough. Dave was very much a practical businessman. He said, it's money. And it's short pieces, 1 page, 2 page, what have you. And we wound up um writing such a wide variety of things. It was just absolutely incredible. Um, as I mean, essentially, we cornered the market, working under Saul.
So you and Dak were responsible for all of those little short advertisement things.
Yeah. Um, So anyway, so sadly, Saul passed away. He a long illness, and Jim asked me to write his uh, basically his obituary. Now, I had never really done anything like that before. And as I said, I was really nervous about that. And I said, "Are you sure?" And he had the confidence in me to, say, yes, I want you to do that. So I put it together, this piece, and it appeared in Marvel Age number 22. and um, Saul's widow read it, and she was very happy with what I had done, which was very touching, I have to say. Um, so I did a lot of work on Marvel Age, uh, eventually becoming the managing editor and doing a wide variety of things. And then, okay, my wife was pregnant with our first, uh, and mentioned to Jim, I said, "Yeah, I'm going to have a family soon, and I need more than just freelance work." Now, my wife was a teacher at the time. Well, she still is. But we needed to have more money coming in because, of course, now suddenly we're going to be a family. And thanks to Jim, I was asked to interview for a position as an administrative assistant, a secretary at Marvel's domestic licensing department. I did my, talk with Alan Gordon, who was the vice president of domestic licensing at the time. Um, and I got hired. And when the news came out to editorial, they were thrilled. Why? Because they said, finally, someone who actually knows our
The
characters
character.
is going to be there,
Uh-huh.
which I did. Because there were many a story about near misses where such things as Spider-Man's red and blue colors,
Spider-Gun.
yeah, were transposed,
Uh-huh.
and
Oh,
you know, and various other stories. So at least I could, sit there and go, no. Now I loved Alan. Alan was a great boss, I have to say, but he had this really annoying habit of grabbing me at the last minute and saying, Dwight, I'm going into this meeting with this licensor for X, and I need to know about character Y. And I've got like 5 minutes as we're walking down the corridor to explain to him, all this stuff. So, to on the good point is he taught me how to think fast on my feet. And then there was the time when he asked me about Jean Grey, and I saw my opportunity to get back at him. Okay, so he grabs me. It's a T-shirt or some sort of licensee thing. And he says, Dwight, tell me about Jean Grey. And just as we're getting close, I said, which one? And he looks at me and I said, well, there's Jean Grey, the original Miss Marvel, the original Phoenix. There's Jean Grey, Dark Phoenix, who's the evil, Jean Grey. And then there's Rachel Phoenix from another dimension who comes in. So which one do you want to know about? And he looked at me and he just wanted to slug me, you know. And I said, oh, well, you want the original Jean Grey, And then
another
I just,
hero.
yeah, yeah. But I couldn't resist because he didn't know it. Yeah, well, these people, they don't, their job is to work with outside businesses, and unfortunately, unless you're really immersed in the comic book, field, you don't know these characters. And this was one of those things where I just really enjoyed it. And here's the other thing. I that on a personal level, I was so happy to get in there because why? I would suddenly have access to all the Marvel contracts. And this was at a time when Tim Burton's Batman, DC's, the Christopher Reeve Superman, Batman, all of the, DC was just gangbusters with their movies. But why couldn't Marvel get any of their movies out? Well, of course, because I'm in domestic licensing, part of my job is to go into the contracts department room, pull out various contracts for whatever to review, and pass them on to superiors. And I immediately went, well, immediately, I went to the files, the movie files, and started pulling out those different folders. And boy, was that illuminating. Uh, they were, I was just astonished at how Marvel screwed up in doing the contracts.
Yes.
Um, uh, Cutting to the chase, when I started looking at the details, now, no, I'm not trained in law or anything like that, but I do, I can read. And when I'm seeing no deadline
Right.
on whether or not you do anything, so it's open-ended. And also, I started looking at the date that the contract was signed, and I said, oh, what they're doing here is they're looking at the quarterly reports. Because at that, when these contracts are signed, this is when Cadence, for instance, had purchased Marvel. Cadence is a publicly traded company. So they were simply looking at boosting the stock price.
Right.
The dollar figure was like $50,000. So, so it's peanuts. But what they really wanted to have was, to make that announcement shortly before, the quarterly report. And then, investors, they don't know Canon films from 21st century films, from Sony, from this, that. And I'm just saying, well, no wonder. They were just simply, cashing in and, to get the quick buck, not looking down the road. Which, so when subsequently find out about all the negotiations that, happened post bankruptcy and everything, well, that's where that all,
Characters. Yeah. They tied up characters because they were short-sighted. We made that same mistake once, but fortunately we were able to extract ourselves from it. So
exactly. So,
before
um,
we run out of time, let me interrupt you because you worked with Carol Kalish for a while. I loved Carol. Can you tell us something about her?
well, that was very brief. Um, what happened there was, well,
Carol Kalish was Marvel's liaison with retail store owners, among other things that she did.
yeah, well, she was originally in charge of the direct market, and then she moved on to new product development. And at one point, Alan pulled me in and basically, he said, uh, there's, you can't get promoted in domestic licensing. So he recommended that I talk to Carol and, move over to um, new product development. And it was an interesting, interview because Carol, when I walked in, well, obviously we knew each other, and she said, she was very upfront. She said, well, actually, I think I have to sell myself to you instead of the other way around.
Really?
Yes. Well, she had a reputation.
Yes, she did.
Um, I don't think I have to tell you about that.
No, as I said, I adored her, but Carol was Carol.
So, what happened there was, um, and well, I saw the writing on the wall, so I said, okay, um, I'll work for you, Carol. I was put in charge of this fan club that she created, um, and Wham, Wild Agents of Marvel. And as we were putting that whole thing together, that's when she um, had the heart aneurysm
Oh,
and passed away. I mean, died very suddenly.
so it was very brief that you worked with
Yeah.
her. Oh
Oh,
my.
yeah.
And she was
And
just walking down the street and her heart gave out. It was,
ex yes, exactly. So that put, yeah, essentially that blew up the division, and um, since she was the driving force for that, for the fan club, and in practical terms, I was a nobody. Yeah, um, the fan club died a quick death.
yes.
And I was transferred over to the marketing department, and that was really a poor fit. I just did not have the right um, chops, as it were, for uh, that. Ooh, we're almost done. 4 minutes.
Yeah. As I said, we were getting short. So let's do this. Any last thoughts? Anything that you'd like to say? You wrote a story or two on your own, right? You did a Black Cat story at some point.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah. Well, that was for Terry Cavanaugh, Marvel Comics Presents. I did. That was a regular account for me. And I did this Black Cat story, and nice little 8-pager. Nothing really, special or anything. Um, and about 3 months, it should be coming out. And when it didn't, I said, "Well, okay, maybe 4 months pass, 5 months pass," and I go, "It's still not out." So this is when I was working in the domestic licensing department. And so went down. So I'm on the 11th floor, and I go down to the 10th floor, which is where editorial was. And I walk into Terry's office, and I say, "Hey, Terry, what about my Black Cat story?" And he looked up and he said, "Oh, well, the inker for that story uh, murdered his wife, and blood spilled onto the artwork pages.
Oh, I
So
shouldn't laugh.
the story pages became state's evidence in a murder trial." What the hell? I said, "Well, that's a unique scenario." At that time, I made a point of doing full-size Xeroxes of the artwork for my stories. So I told Derry, "Let me check. I'll make sure that I actually have, that, because I think I do." And I went home that evening, pulled out the folder, and yes, I did have, Xeroxes of the pencil art. Next day I came in and said, "Here, Terry, take that." So the story did finally come out, but I
Do you
have to
remember
say,
which issue of Marvel Comics Presents it was? Any
uh,
chance? I'm sure we can
no,
find it.
no, I'd have to, do some research on that.
Well, it's fine. We can find it. I'm sure we can. I have the same kinds of stories. I wrote stories for Marvel Comics Presents, and it was months and months and months before they finally. So there were some
Yeah.
good ones too. We got a couple of really good artists to work on those stories.
Oh, I loved working on that, and it was an exciting, project.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
so
let's wrap it up, Dwight. Well, we went down memory lane here, which is what I had in mind. Talking about Marvel, your history with Marvel, a little bit about Dave too. That was great. Um, I want to point people to your history books. We mentioned that last time, right? Do give us your again, as you did last time. Where can people find out about the work that you're doing on, in the books that you do?
well, okay, the best way
Quickly.
is, yeah, yes. Uh, Dwight John Zimmerman, and that's Jon, the Scandinavian spelling of John. Go on to Amazon, type in my name, Dwight John Zimmerman, and you will get this really wide range of material. My military history stuff, my Marvel comic stuff, some top stuff. Um, I have I have to say that no one is more amazed at my creative output than I am. I have managed to do so much stuff. I became a #1 New York Times bestselling author. On top of that, and won variety of awards. Not in the comic book field, I have to say, now, because I was never that popular. But all that to say, I had a very successful.
Well, we lost Dwight right at the end of a sentence, but I think right at the end of our interview. So I think we covered all the topics we wanted to topic. I will have him back at some point to talk more about his books and maybe about his work that he actually did with Tops. Anyway, thank you, Dwight, for being with us this week. I want to encourage people to share, to subscribe if you haven't already, and definitely to like this if you like it. We'll be back next week, and we'll see you then.